Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Sit Down with Shibby. I am joined by Mr. Brandon Collamer, aka Zuby's dad, aka Mr. Down Bad, aka Porked Up White Boy with a little bit of sauce, but most commonly known as just Collamer. How are you, man?
Doing good. Happy it's the weekend, stuff like that. I don't know, it's going good, so pretty happy.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Standard question I ask everybody, every single one, is who are you? For people that don't know, who's Collamer?
What don't I do at this point? I coach collegiate teams. I was lead general manager for Native, and I still work with them. I do a little bit of consulting for collegiate programs, and I'm also an engineer by day. So then cat dad, fitness guy, a lot of other shit.
A multi-talented, multifaceted man. And so I wanted to ask you, because this is a question I want to ask everybody, but I usually just forget. And I think with the league scene being so new and with esports, how did you actually end up specifically in League of Legends, but also esports as a whole?
So League, I originally played COD when I was a kid, when I was like 10, 11, 12, because I had Xbox. And then I remember my friend group at the time, my buddy Avery had a PC and he was playing League, and he just would never play with us. And he's like, I want to play League. I don't want to play Call of Duty with you guys. Sorry. And so we all eventually were like, well, I gotta play League if I want to play with my buddy. So when I was like 13, I worked as a carnival worker. I worked as a carny, and I saved up to get my first computer. And when I was 13, I started playing League, like 7th, 8th grade, and played it for years and years and years. And then the way that I got into esports was I tried out, because I went to Arizona State for my bachelor's, and I tried out for the team there. Like I played support. I was like masters at the time. I was like, oh, I'll try out for the team. And I got back from the coach, who's Bopsay. Shout out to Ben if he somehow ever listens to this. But he's like, hey, you were the best support in tryouts. We want to offer you the JV spot. And I was like, what do you mean the JV spot? Like, you just said I was the best support in tryouts. So he's like, well, we got this dude named Breezy. He's a 1200 LP. He might be a pro player at some point. So yeah, like, we want you to be the JV support. And I was kind of like, I don't really want to be on JV. Like, can I like help and coach and like do staff stuff? Because like I already knew I was going to be a pro player at that point. Like I was like, bro, I'm Master 0P. Like I'm so good. And yeah, I mean that's where it started. I just kind of like wandered around the first like year, just kind of seeing what collegiate was like and trying to figure out how I could help. And I was super useless for that entire first year. And yeah, stuff kind of just took off from there.
I love how it was originally Call of Duty. I think we're roughly the same age. I'm 27. I believe your Wikipedia says you're 26. So yeah, we probably started playing League.
25. Yeah,
25. Oh, okay. I think Wikipedia might be wrong then.
Yeah, I will say Wikipedia also has my birthday wrong, which is really funny. They've never fixed
that. There you go. You gotta contact whoever's updating that information. So yeah, it is funny. Like Call of Duty, and then like you said, it's just someone has a PC. I feel like a lot of people, unfortunately, that's just how people get into League. It's like one friend, or sometimes it's like in a relationship, their boyfriend or girlfriend plays it. I feel like one of the big issues that League has had is like just growing kind of outside of that, where it's like you see League of Legends and it like makes you want to play it, right? Do you think that's kind of an issue that it has endemically? Like for fighting games, for Valorant, for all these other games, you look at it and you're like, man, this looks fun. Like I want to do this. I want to play this. Whereas League, it feels like a lot of the audience and a lot of people, when they find it on Twitch or they find it on YouTube, it's like, oh, that kind of looks interesting, but I don't really understand what's going on. Like, do you think the initial curve for people to get into League is at an all-time low?
I think it's probably actually higher than it used to be, because what used to happen was that even if you didn't know League that well, you could watch like content creators and they would just make really simple like content, stuff like that. And then that kind of educational content has kind of gotten phased out for more like reaction based content, and like a lot of the people who used to make that kind of content have moved on to other avenues. Like I don't even know, but like a lot of the OG like League streamers that used to make that content, they just don't do League anymore, or they're doing whatever. So I think that's part of it. I also think that like this goes into like a whole conversation. We can talk about this for like literally 2 hours just in itself. But yeah, the issue of like MOBA as a genre not being really popular, it being pretty hard to understand. It just doesn't really resonate with a lot of like the people here. Like the whole like fact that Scholastic in North America for esports has been like really screwed up. used to play versus and some other things. Very much little to no effort in terms of like syncing, like making efforts from like pro teams or anything like that to kind of get those new players and kind of attract those kind of fans and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a multifaceted issue. I think it's the biggest thing that league deals with right now, and there's some changes that have been pretty good, like play versus no longer having autonomy. Um, and I think that the LCS has tried in recent years to kind of fix some of their mistakes, but yeah, I don't know. We'll kind of see how stuff goes. Obviously, there's been a lot of not super wonderful news recently with the ecosystem as a whole. So, we'll kind of see how people make do, I guess.
Well, we can definitely talk more and extrapolate on league's issues here. But Colin, I wanted to talk about you. That's why I have you on here for the interview. So I did a bit of digging, a bit of history. You had a lot of brief stints with certain teams, right? Like 19 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Empyreans, Ego Geniuses. It was like 19 days, 2 weeks here. I think with Purdue, you had like a 17-day kind of stint.
Definitely not.
Can you? Not Purdue. I'm so sorry. Ottawa. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. You have a pretty extensive kind of resume of teams, and some of them you've been with a lot longer, like you said, and then some of the smaller ones as well. Can you explain to me what the purpose of some of these brief stints were? Because on the outside, it feels like you can't really get a lot of done in 2 weeks' time with a lot of teams. Like, what was the reason for them bringing you on? Or maybe you kind of like forced your way and you're like, hey, let me help you guys out.
Yeah, so funny enough, like so I think there's the three main ones, which is like Ottawa, Ego Geniuses, and Imperiums were like the main three. So, and they all had different reasons. So first things first, Ego Geniuses was just like an amateur team for one of the OQs, and they didn't qualify, so it's like, all right, roster boom.
Yeah.
Like I was going through stuff. I was working at Facebook at the time, so I was really tired all the time, and I was like, I ain't got time for this. Ottawa was a situation where they hired me on, and I actually worked for like a month and a half or whatever. Like the dates aren't super accurate with Leaguepedia sometimes. But I worked there for like a really long time. The guys were like kind of improving, but from when I've talked to the players and I talked to Sergio, who's the director at the time, like the way that the players and the team worked, coaching wasn't beneficial, and I didn't do a lot of actual coaching for them. A lot of what I was doing was like anger management and like basically just being like a therapist, which I get is like totally chill, but I kind of knew like a lot of that situation just had issues that I couldn't really fix, and so I was just like, and even the players were like, dude, like you're wasting your time here, like you can't fix us, and I was like, all right, fair enough. And then Empyreans is the interesting one because the only reason I left Empyreans, which isn't on my thing, is that at the time I was working with Shia, who is the coach of AOE now in NACL, and Zoo, who was at Maryville at the time, needed a coach's assistant. And so I talked to Shia and I was like, yo, I'm kind of doing the collegiate thing. I kind of want to, continue doing that. And she was like, I think that's a good idea. Like, I think that's better for your career. Like, you should go and work with him instead. So I ended up being a coach assistant for Maryville for the next month and a half after that. But that's the only reason I left. And that's just never made it onto my Leaguepedia for whatever reason. So
We got beef with your Leaguepedia people, man. Like we got,
dude, it's just so hard to get this stuff updated. I'm not too worried about it.
The birthday, the age. Now you got like no credit on some stuff. Yeah, we gotta talk to some people over at Leaguepedia. I do actually want to talk about the assistant coach position specifically because what I've noticed in CLOL is that's actually a fairly rare position, mostly because a lot of CLOL teams, how they operate, they usually have just like one head coach, a director, right? And they've got their players, and that's pretty much all they have budget for. If you're willing to dive into it or delve into some of the assistant coaching positions, were all of these paid, or did you do some of these just as like kind of like, hey, let me prove my worth, let me get my name out there? Like assistant coach isn't really a position even now within CLOL that's really prominent. It's not really budgeted for. So how did you end up acquiring that kind of role? Because you were an assistant coach for a couple different teams.
Oh yeah, dude, it was free labor all the way. Every single one of those was free labor. Like when I was coach's assistant at Maryville, that was literally just so I could learn because I was like, you just won a national championship. I kind of want to learn from that. Same thing with Imperiums. I was like, she seems like to be a good coach, and I don't feel confident to be a head coach yet. And I really didn't until I got the job at Bethany. And Arizona State, I think they basically were like, you want to like we could probably find stuff for you to do, and if you don't want to play, you don't want to play. So that was that was more of definitely like them just kind of making space to kind of accommodate me, which I was really thankful for, because again, I was frankly an idiot and I didn't know what I was doing back then, and I acknowledge that. But yeah, I mean, I think at the collegiate level, especially, like, budgets are pretty thin depending on where you're at, and realistically, like, a lot of the resources you end up wanting to go to players, and then maybe staff, and then maybe if you're really lucky, there's something like left over, they'll like pay for your dinner sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I also think at the collegiate level, like, there's not a lot of good coaches anyway, so getting a lot of like high value assistant coaches is like even rare. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's pretty rare. I think it's pretty rare for a reason, for resource purposes and usefulness, frankly. I can say for most of my assistant roles, I wasn't super productive, but I learned a lot. It's like an internship, basically, I think. So
Perfect segue. Like you mentioned, Bethany, right? That was your first real like head coaching kind of, or coaching, real paid coaching position. I would assume. Yeah. You made a pretty deep run in that CLOL championship, right? Talk to me about what that meant for you in the 2021 CLOL specific. If anybody watching CLOL 2021 championship, Bethany made a top 4 run. They ended up, I believe, 3rd, 4th is they kind of, that's how they classify it. If you lose the semifinals, it's 3rd, 4th place. Was that a moment for you where like it was a vindication for all the work you've been putting into the scene? Because like you said previously, you did stints here, you did some stuff here, you weren't really confident enough, like at the time, to be like a head coach, all that other stuff. But you were part of that top 4 run, upsetting teams. I looked at some of the VODs. A lot of the guys were very, I wouldn't say a lot of the casters, but just like on paper, right? They were, you weren't seen as one of the stronger teams. You had to gain respect and all that stuff. Was that like a really big moment for you internally? Like to say like, hey, I'm actually like really fucking good at coaching.
I think a bit, and then at the same time, it also made me doubt myself more than ever, because it's like a double-edged sword. So we went undefeated in North, which is the hardest conference. Like, we went undefeated that year. And I think a lot of people, you could just look at my roster and be like, you have Bradley, who's now played for Team Liquid Academy in the mid lane, and you have like all these good players or whatever. Like, of course you did well. Like, you didn't do anything. But it did a bit. We lost our first round match because I was, at that time, I was like on, I don't know what I was on, but I was doing like a bunch of weird stuff, like brand bot lane all the time, and just like picking Randus and Annie and stuff like that, like all over the place. And I think on some level it was vindication, because again, it was my first time ever being a head coach, and to make that kind of a deep run. And like, I always joke that like the salary scale for like top 4 that year was like 100K, 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 and then there was like me like 95% below everyone else, like way down there. So I was like, oh cool, like maybe someday I could like be a coach and do it full time. Because at the time I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wasn't like super in love with my career or anything like that. And then after the fact, I was super confident, and then super downhill, like super fast. Because getting knocked out really sucked for me personally. I was like, bro, we're making the god run. Like, my prep is so good. Funny enough, I always mention that like we played Winthrop, who won that year in scrims the day before we played Maryville, and we murdered them. Like, each game 20-minute like hard stomps. And I was like, dude, if we just get past Maryville, we're winning this whole thing. And then after the fact, for a lot of different reasons, a lot of it was like, bro, you just got carried by your team, like drop your ego. And so I kind of felt like the swing of both ways, and I think now I can look back at it with like an even thing, where it's like, did I contribute? Yeah, like I had to make a lot of like roster decisions that were really hard. I had to make our game plan around the fact that like our top laner was like D4 going against Challenger, 1000 LP top laners, and our support was just a mid roll swap and a bunch of this other stuff. But I can also benefit from like I had really mechanically good players. So yes and no, basically.
Do you want to talk about kind of the role of a coach? And like you mentioned, right? People were like, hey, you're just getting carried. You're doing this, you're doing that. I feel like coaches in CLOL get a lot more flack, I would say, in regards to like how much, other individuals view that they're contributing, right? Because for CLOL coaches, it's, you got to have some sort of game knowledge. You've got to be a personality manager, like you said. You've got to be a mediator. You've also got to make sure that these guys are getting like an education first. You have to be like a time manager. There are a lot of different unsung and I would say underrepresented aspects of a CLOL coach, in my opinion, a CLOL coach, versus like somebody that is purely coaching for like an amateur team, right? Like obviously the mediator part is still there, the game knowledge part is still there, but you're not having to necessarily make sure that these guys are like on top of their classes, making time for this, doing that. Do you think that CLOL coaches get unfairly judged against kind of what they contribute for teams? And like, do you think there's a lot more into it? Like certain skills that a CLOL coach has is needed to where like they might not have the most game knowledge, but they're really good at making sure their players are on time, or like they're getting an education, or like these guys who are like 18, 19, 20 years old that have not really had a lot of time to mature are talking to each other in a way that is productive, like communication wise. Do you think CLOL coaches get unjudged fairly is pretty much the basis of this question?
I would say that so I think it depends on the criticism. I think a lot of CLOL coaches are basically managers. I think a lot of them are, again, they're responsible for making sure their players show up, making sure the grades are good, and the game knowledge is kind of secondary, and that's okay. I think that you can lead a decent team and be a pretty, lacking in terms of game knowledge coach in terms of prep and stuff like that, and not really know what you're doing and still like have a decent run. But I also think that naturally as a coach, a lot of people just assume that you need to be able to, drafting Zodia all the time and be able to uh, do really good at like one-on-one coaching. And there's a certain skill set that people think coaches do, and then there's certain skills that are like really important. And a lot of like the soft skills about like making sure the team's on the same page, making sure that you're managing egos, making sure that you're prioritizing like equally, and that you can like, sometimes like you have to prioritize a player over another, something that's going to make one player feel really good, like, oh, like you're doing great, and then meanwhile like your top laner is like playing Zion all the time and he hates his life. And it's like those are the kind of things that you have to balance when you're a coach, especially in CLOL, because at the end of the day, like especially for CLOL, a lot of places you're not on like a full ride, you're on like a partial or like no scholarship. So if you're not able to manage those things, your player can just be like, dude, I don't want to play anymore. And then now you're down a player and your roster's screwed up. So I think, yes, I do think that CLOL coaching is coaching in a very distorted sense of the word all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is soft skills. And I think a lot of that is underrepresented when you're talking about like how good a coach is and stuff. A lot of it, you just never know if you're not part of the team. So
Yeah, you would never know on like through player interviews and stuff like
yeah,
that. Whereas like I feel like I think amateur coaches kind of are under the gun all the time when it comes to like drafting, when it comes to
yeah,
like you said, right, managing egos, because it's a whole different story, right? It's a completely different environment where you have four or five, generally five players trying to get to that next level, and if they don't, like you said, rosters collapse, they go boom, stuff like that. Whereas at the collegiate level, it's more. I feel like a majority of players like, oh, I'm really good at league. Let me see if I can get like a scholarship or right. There are some players that do the CLOL and NACL at this point, right? I think one of the players that comes to mind is like Aaron. He did like GVU, then SLU. Obviously, he was on Last Dance, Seal to Faith, all that stuff. There's a lot of players like him now, or a pretty solid amount of players that are doing what he's doing now. But generally, a lot of these clubs and organizations, they're just working with what they've got, right?
yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's what I've always kind of want to understand, because you've been on both sides. So can you kind of speak to maybe the amateur side and what is more valuable and more important versus like the CLOL side? Because like I feel like CLOL coaches can't necessarily transfer to amateur, and I would even say to some extent a lot of amateur coaches might not be able to handle what CLOL is, right, in terms of workload, in terms of the extra responsibilities you have as a CLOL coach. Would you say
Yeah,
that's fair or?
I think kind of. I think a lot of amateur coaches could go into CLOL and do like okay. I think like Koso, for example, he's over at Bethany, and like they're making a run to maybe make top four this weekend and whatnot. I think a lot of CLOL coaches lack the game knowledge to compete at like high amateur levels, just because at a certain point, like if your roster's five challenger players, right? Like, well, I can use native as an example, right? Like our head coach Taki. If Taki came into the team and it was just like didn't know anything about what he was talking about and game knowledge was just like absolutely fucked up, like the team would literally just be like, we don't want him here, and like you'd be gone. Collegiate's kind of different, especially if you're getting paid, because it's not really easy to like, fire people that are getting paid by an actual educational institution.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of amateur coaches could do well in CLOL if they have the soft skills, which hit or miss from some of the coaches I've worked with and talked to. But a lot of CLOL coaches, I think that there's like maybe like a handful that I'm like, yeah, you could coach an amateur and like provide a decent amount of value to like these players and stuff like that.
I do want to shift over to native, right? We've talked the CLOL. Obviously, we'll get to Ole Miss when we want to, but I do want to talk about your role on native because it's pretty much completely different than what you do in CLOL. It's a general manager role, right? As of most recently, typically the perceived responsibilities of a GM is to make a lot of the big decisions, right? Regarding rosters, regarding players, regarding staff. When you were brought on to native, were you allowed that purview and that power to like, hey, I want to hire these guys, I want these players, or like how much of it was already constructed before you kind of got on? And also, just for context, he's GM of native as a whole, so it's not just a league division, you're also doing potentially other esports, correct?
Yeah, I've definitely given some insight into other stuff, and I think that native's gonna talk about some stuff like over the next like couple weeks or whatever, because I'm still with them. And we're just kind of trying to figure out some back end stuff before we make an announcement on anything. For like the league GM specifically, yeah, I mean they just gave me full autonomy. Frankly they were like, you know the space better than we do, and better than basically anyone else that we could find. So, like this is these are our values, these are the constraints, like budget and brand identity that we want to work with. Like let us know, like give us some options and we'll let you know like what we want to do. And like head coach, I had full autonomy over that. Support staff, players, I mean that was basically 50-50 between me and Taki. But yeah, I mean they gave me full autonomy. They were like, just put together a winning program, and unfortunately we didn't really do enough winning compared to expectations or what we wanted to do. But yeah, I mean they is great. They gave me a lot of freedom to like make those decisions and kind of expand the skill set that I developed as a coach and add some new stuff in there.
Talk to me about roster construction as like as a topic, right? Because a lot of people seem to have the idea that you have scouts, you've got like a really deep knowledge of solo queue, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're like VOD reviewing, you're watching scrims, you're trialing. Is it as in depth as that as like a GM, or like you are pretty much on a pretty short timeline, right? Like you can only realistically trial a handful of players, especially as an amateur organization. You may not have the resources like an LCS team that's fielding an amateur team, right? Or like a challenger team, right? You've got a lot less time to work with. You've got a lot less people. What is that process like, right? And how did you end up with the 5 players on native, if you're allowed to kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So amateur is really weird in the sense of like everything's super chaotic like all the time. Like I love Scoops, but Scoops was like the 680 carry that we had decided on in like a 2 week span. Like we had to like go from like all over the place, and we're like, okay, we can get Scooped. Just as an example. So a lot of it kind of comes down to narrowing. Like we had an application-based process, and then we had some other people that we had reached out to individually. Rhino being one that he didn't even apply, but we were like, dude, please. So yeah, I think the process, at least at the amateur level, is just names usually is how you know, and then like at a certain level you can be like a lower end team and like take some risks on like some decent players. I think like Kryra is a good example, someone who just got picked up for the EG Combine. Like that's a player that if I was like on a team that had no money, I would like pick that guy up in a heartbeat in terms of like players. But again, like if you're in my situation native, right, trying to balance like veterancy and win now and stuff like that, then it's like, okay, cool. Well, like if I have fan, I'm getting fan, right? It's just not really a fair comparison. I think at the pro level, I think a lot of the scouting that pros do is like overrated. I will say that like most GMs will literally just reach out to people that work in academy and amateur. Like I've had multiple conversations with GMs who are like, "Hey, who's a good prospect?" And I'm like, "I don't know, dude, pay me." So that is something I learned very early on, is stop giving out information for free. Because I used to do that a lot, and then I realized I'm not going to get paid if I just tell everyone everything for free all the time. So I think scouting is not as in depth at most orgs. I think FlyQuest is one of the only ones, and EG2 are the ones that do a pretty good job of like scouting solo queue and stuff like that too. But I think as a whole, it's very simplistic. Like list of players that or that have experience. You trial them through some scrim games. You listen to how they communicate with each other. You find a couple core pieces, and you're like, who do we want to fill out the rest of these last couple spots?
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured, but I think a lot of the outside perspective is like you'll see it a lot. Like you see like Twitter, Reddit, all that stuff. It'll be like, oh, like where do they find these players? Like, how do you, like, what is the scouting? Like, this guy was available. Like, how come they didn't get him? And there's like so many different extraneous factors as to like maybe that person was getting offers from 5 different teams and you were like the 6th one on their list, right? Like it can literally be like that. And so the roster construction for amateur teams, it's always felt hectic in my opinion, but I don't think a lot of people kind of understand like the time.
It is.
And
dude, I could go on for, but yeah, like I will say that like for our AD carry position, like we had decided on an AD carry, and we had basically built our roster, and then we were like, okay, our AD carry couldn't play on weekends, on Saturdays. He works Saturdays, and I was like, okay, need a different AD carry. So then we're like going back through, and we're like, okay, we need to like narrow it down to like all these top AD carries from our tryouts or whatever. Like we'll do more scrims with them, and then it's like, okay, but like who are we not considering? That we reached out to a couple other AD carries that were like on other teams potentially, or they were like fielding offers, or they just weren't going to play. And it's like, hey, are you interested? So he basically had to like throw everything around. It's like, okay, this is our option A, and if A can't do it, then we go B, and if B can't do it, then we'll have C and D, and then like C and D can like do a scrim, and like it gets so chaotic at a certain point that like shout out to Myra from NRG, because she had to deal with me venting about how stressful it is, and the whole time she's like, dude, like it sucks, welcome to the party, like this is just how it is, dude. So it was definitely a learning process this way. I mean, I had dealt with that as a coach, but a lot of the time, like previously as a coach, if I don't do well in amateur, I don't care. Like it doesn't affect me. But you know, Native is paying me to put together a good roster. Now it's a little bit more stressful, and you know, you want to have good results. So
you're the second person on this show that has specifically shouted out Myra for venting. By the way.
Myra's the goat.
I definitely have to look into getting her on eventually when she's obviously free and everything like that and all that stuff. So I just like, it's so funny that you're like the second person out of like 5 episodes now that's like, oh yeah, shout out to Myra. By that, I'm like, damn, like she's got like, she's everywhere. She's everywhere. Yeah. I do want to talk about the comparisons of a GM for like an amateur team versus maybe like a director for a collegiate program. Obviously, like, you know, you haven't held that role. I understand that.
They're both incompetent, so I'm not kidding. My hatred for collegiate directors grows every day.
Yeah. With what you see on Twitter, man, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff happening. Do you think those positions are comparable, given that maybe you're obviously you're a GM? So what would be the big and major differences, like a director for a collegiate program versus like a GM for a team?
I mean, GM for a team, like all you have to care about is like the team side of stuff, right? Like, especially like if you're at the LCS level, you have to kind of look like a year ahead all the time. Like that's its own thing. But like when you're a collegiate director, like you have to deal with like educational bureaucracy. You have to deal with parents. You have to deal with like players and that are changing their minds all the time about whether or not they want to do. You have to deal with players who like don't know how to navigate their education. You have players who are like failing classes, and you have to deal with like, you know, sponsorships. And it's like being a director is like, I said it before, like I wanted to be a collegiate director at some point, but like making so little money for how much stress and how much like stuff that those guys have to deal with is just so not worth it. If you can do anything, I mean, it's like esports in general, right? Like if you can do anything else, you should probably do anything else if you're being smart about it. But collegiate director especially, like that, and I think that's why the bar is so low and why I'm super critical of directors, because I'm like, guys, like, can we hire some better people here? Because there's a lot to ask of this role, and this role has people's educations and future in their hands. And whereas a GM, like again, like it's like, oh cool, like gonna set up the org to do well, and then you can kind of just be like, you know, a lot of the time, if you really want to, if you want to be a bad GM. But
it feels like collegiate director is a double-edged sword, though, right? Or almost like a self-fulfilling cycle, because it's like you have to do so much for so little pay. But because that nobody actually experienced would want to go in there, so you get really inexperienced guys, right? What do you think? Obviously, the easy answer is money, right? Obviously, what needs to change for esports directors to kind of, you know, not necessarily the current ones step up their game, but maybe certain schools and stuff like that and organizations to say like, hey, we need to start hiring more competent directors. The easy answer is money, but generally that's not possible. Do you think that there's something else that these guys, that these organizations can do? Because it just feels like at the end of the day, you're kind of just stuck with whoever is willing to become a director, right? Like you said it yourself, you wanted to become one. You're somebody that has fairly well respected, knowledgeable about the scene, knowledgeable about the game, all that stuff, but you don't want to be director. So how does I'm going to throw a random school, Winthrop, get Collamer to be their director?
Yeah, shout out Bo, you're getting fired. I think I think I'm a really bad comparison, because I think at this point, like with where I'm at with like my career and my life, like I don't think I even if I could do other stuff, I think esports is just not in it right now. I would caution, like, if there's one takeaway, is don't do esports full time. Like, you're setting yourself up to really be hurting in the next year or two. But I think that in terms of director, like, you need to bring in like consultants or whatever that can help you figure out what you're actually hiring for and what skills are important. So I've talked with Clarky about this, because Clarky has worked with schools to help fill in those kind of roles or whatever. Like, hire someone like Dan to just come by and like sit on the interview process, because that's usually what happens. Is like the people who interview well and like can put a bunch of stuff on paper and know how to phrase things well and can say a lot of buzzwords. Those are the people that kind of get those interviews and get those jobs. And those are usually the people who also know that they don't get paid enough to do a ton of extra stuff. So I think that's like the main thing, is like getting people who are knowledgeable in the space involved in the hiring process, even if you're not hiring them. That can be current directors, that can be people who have if you're hiring a coach, like get a former, bring in a myself, bring in Zoo, bring in X Special, bring in one of those people who can actually ask those questions, where all the people who are involved in education have no idea what the hell you're talking about, but they can come back and say, yeah, this guy knows what you're talking about, or like, no, this guy's an idiot. I think that's the easiest way. But on some level, right, like just like any other job in any other industry, hiring process costs money, and to get more qualified people, you're going to have to spend more, whether it's through recruiting or higher salary, whatever it is. So I also think a lot of schools don't care. A lot of schools, if they get the people, they get the students or whatever to come in, then they're happy, and they don't really care about it being competitive or not. So
Yeah, you don't have people talking about offensive and defensive
offensive and
League of
defensive
Legends.
coaches, yeah. Oh man, what a good meme.
Anyways, I want to jump to kind of the players, and this is the kind of question I've asked other collegiate individuals, coaches and stuff like that. Is that there seems to be, I label it as a problem, specific personally. There seems to be a big problem where a lot of players on collegiate teams are delaying their education to go transfer to different schools, and for someone like me who's been through the college system, right, who's college educated, all that fun stuff, if you transfer to different schools, like states away sometimes, or in the different, west or east, right, your credits won't transfer over. You're delaying your education. You're delaying your bachelor's. Do you perceive that as a problem for collegiate esports as a whole, where like a lot of individuals will specifically transfer to another school to like chase a championship or chase a ring and stuff like that, delaying their education? And do you think that, I guess, CLOL, or do you think that Riot or whoever can do something about that, create like rules to like where if you transfer over, like you have to make sure like your X amount of credits are viable for you to play? Like, how, like, do you think it's an issue?
I think it's an issue, and I don't think there's anything Riot can really do, because Riot, I don't think they want to limit people from the opportunity of playing. Like, they're pretty much like, if you're
Of
in school,
course,
like,
right?
we want you
Yeah.
to play. I think it is a massive problem though. It's one of those things where I've talked to like college players that like are trying to transfer. They don't even understand the concept of like credits not transferring. It's like, dude, like you transferred, like that last year you did just didn't count, and you still have to pay it. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, I did 2 years. I'm like, no, like only half those credits are transferring, dude. Like, you're gonna have to do another 3 years here. So yeah, it's like a massive problem. I mean, it's just like any other situation that you have like 18, 19, 20 year olds. Like, a lot of them are gonna be dumb. Frankly, I was an idiot at 18, 19, 22. Still am. But I think it is a problem in the sense of, but I think it also comes down to directors. Like, we've had a lot of people like ask about Ole Miss, right? Because big school, good education that is offering like decent financial aid for players and stuff like that. And like the first thing I always tell them is just like, if you're transferring, how many credits are actually transferring? Because if you're 3 years into a degree at you know University of Toronto, right, and zero of those transfer, it is not worth it for you to go through 4 more years of school. Like, you are almost there. Just stay one more year. Like, just get your education. And that's like the other thing too that's big for me, is like, I want anyone who like, and when I recommend situations, whether it's like myself or like go talk to Maryville, go talk to Winthrop, go talk to whoever, to like players and staff, like for me it really comes down to like, what is the best thing going to be for that person's like career aspirations and stuff like that. Like if that person wants to get an education and go like in the workforce someday, which the probably gonna have to. What is the thing that makes the most sense for them? Because even if you help me win a championship at Ole Miss, I'm not going to sleep well knowing that I screwed over your entire education. You're going to be in college till you're 35, just so that way I could get a championship and boost my ego a bit. Like that's just not worth it to me. Um, so I think it is a problem. I don't know if there's anything really to do, but my one bit of advice to players, and a lot of times players ask me like, "Hey, I'm trying to transfer, like find a school or whatever," is like talk about it and like know what you're getting into. Like ask those questions of like, how many classes am I going to take? How long am I going to be here? How much do you think I'm going to like owe and stuff like that? Because you don't want to get surprised. Because I've been around players that are like, yeah, I found out that like I took 2.5 years of classes and none of them transferred over. And so now I'm basically starting as a freshman, but I have $50,000 in debt. It's like, oh, that's cool, man. Like, good luck. So I think it is a problem, but I don't think there's a really easy solution other than students trying to be extra safe when they are looking to transfer.
Do you think collegiate programs have, at least some of the top end ones, right, have shifted more to like a recruiting where like, hey, we've got these many programs, we've done this, we've won X amount of championships, right? Like you should transfer over, right? Do you think there's a kind of a problem within that ecosystem where it's like you have programs that are more focused on recruiting top level talent, quote unquote, rather than ensuring that a lot of these guys get education? Or is it just like you said, player incompetence a little bit when it comes to their own self?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really want to blame the players too much because again, like when you're in college, like you're not going to know how the world works, and that's fine. Because again, like I didn't either. Like if you would ask me like what the transfer process was if I want to go from Arizona State to Stanford or whatever, I'd be like, dude, I have no idea. Schools are always going to act in their best interest, and their best interest is to get more people to go there, especially when it comes to esports, and especially if, like I said, they just kind of want to fill in those numbers. School gets 600 people in their esports program. They don't really. It's also not really their responsibility on how long it's going to take them. But I think as a staff member, as like a coach or a director, you should make sure that you're keeping your students happy and letting them make informed decisions. Yeah, it's probably not going to be the best for the school's bottom line or maybe the bonus that you get for recruiting more people. But at the end of the day, it's like schools are always going to want more people to go there. Like, yeah, I'm like that with Ole Miss. Like, I love all the students that we have in the esports program. We're like 1,000 kids deep at like the esports program at Ole Miss as a whole. I think it actually might be more. Don't quote me on that.
Still a lot.
But yeah, no, it's massive. It was massive way before I got there. Ole Miss esports has been around for like a decade almost at this point. But that's one of those things where when I'm again like if I'm recruiting people, I have no issue telling someone like I don't think you should go to Ole Miss. Like I want you on the team, but in your own best interest, if I was in your position, I wouldn't go here. And that's a conversation I've had to have a lot recently, actually, because after CLOL ended, everyone's like, "Hey, like, you guys looking for transfers? Are you guys doing a second team? Like, what's up?" And I think a lot of that comes down to morality, and I think a lot of it comes down to again, like if you're a director and you're making 50K, hopefully the dog just walked in the room. Sorry. If you're making 50K as a director and you get a bonus for recruiting a certain amount of students, it's really hard to turn down a 15% raise or whatever, just because of the goodness of your heart, right? Especially if you want to make it a career, you want to be a good director, so you can be a good director somewhere else that pays more, and so on and so forth. I'm lucky enough to not really have that kind of moral dilemma given my situation, but yeah, I think it is a problem, and I don't think it's really easy to fix.
Fair enough. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in the CLOL scene. Let's talk about Ole Miss, right? Because I feel like your squad, your team, didn't really get to show everything that they're worth, right? You guys were dealing with player sicknesses. People had COVID. I think one of your players was like, I think in this one of the matches, he was like saying like in between matches, he was like going to the bathroom and like throwing up. And
went top in finals.
Yeah, but also within top 32 as well, you guys were dealing with like player issues and sicknesses and stuff like that. Do you think how this season turned out for both your conference and CLOL top 32? Do you think your team got to show everything that they're worth, or do you think that there was like a lot more to your guys and a lot like you could have done a lot more?
Oh, there's so much more. Like that. So the hard
it's a loaded
part
question.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and I take some blame on that because again, like the week leading into the match or whatever, which is the most important part, I was in the hospital, right, and I had no contact with my guys. I couldn't help them prep. I had to literally get told on the phone in the hospital about what our matches were. It sucks because we got Cleary, who's the best opponent in that group by far, and then we got Northwood, who I thought was a top 15. So, I'll keep it. Yeah, I mean, you could argue like we got Slew in our bracket, which was probably the easiest of the top four if we want to make it to LA. But yeah, I mean, our team was a lot better than what we showed. Unfortunately, like game one when we played this last weekend, I thought our draft was fantastic, and I thought we were set up in like a great. I thought we were 100% no shot in hell we were going to lose that game, and then we lost. It's like okay, and then game two draft was a bit worse, and I think everyone was a bit on edge and stuff like that. And Rhino messaged me as soon as he woke up on the day. He's like, "Hey, just so you know, like I'm dying sick and I can't even like move from like the bathroom to the bedroom without like feeling nauseous." I'm like, so yeah. I mean, I thought we had a lot more to show. I think that we also just ran into like the worst like week and a half of our entire season in terms of my issues. We had really bad scrim results heading into it. I think player confidence was a bit shaken. So I think we could have done better. I mean, I'm not really the kind to sit and like dwell on it. I used to a lot and it used to eat at me like constantly. And now it's just kind of like, okay, well, we didn't perform this time, but can't change it now. There's no reason to kind of sit on it. Just learn lessons. Try to use a bit more hand sanitizer for my players apparently, and just try to improve for next year, I guess.
On the Ole Miss roster, you've got a couple players that are like somewhat experienced in the amateur scene, right? Nem9, Legacy, Rhino. I do want to talk about how you happened upon the TikTok star, your mid laner, Uncle Sam. Where did you find this guy? Where, like, because I'm looking at him, like I'm trying to find out who he played for, what did he do? I don't know if he did a name change or rebrand, but talk to me about Uncle Sam.
Yeah, so funny enough, Martim, him and our jungler KJ were like a package deal because we were talking to KJ originally as like a jungle prospect, and he's like, "This
Icelandic hero."
Yeah, Icelandic. We were talking to him, and he's like, "There's this mid laner that like I do it with, and he's great. Like he's masters right now, but like he'll be really good. And like we work together, and our synergy is great. Like you gotta check this guy out." And so like we were considering options for mid, right? We had some other options. We had Nem, obviously, who plays mid for in amateur and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, we just decided that Marta was our best bet, and he got on the roster. He worked his ass off. He hit Challenger for the first time. He was like literally Masters 350 LP, and he peaked Challenger for the first time this year and stuff like that. And him and Icelandic had like the most anti mid jungle synergy ever. Like we recruited them together as a package deal, and those guys could not like work together to save their entire lives.
They hoodwinked you. They duped you. They fleeced you. Icelandic was
like, dude. I think that it's solo queue when they play together, it's really good. But in comp or whatever, it drove me nuts. And like this whole year was basically me trying to function how those two like operate with each other. Which we
give me an example. Could you give me an example of something that happened in scrims?
Yeah,
if you're allowed to.
So we had a scrim set where like our mid laner was picking up mid Gragas, so you're picking in scrims, and it was some matchup where it's like Gragas versus like Galley or something like that. Like they're like the whole point of that is like Grog, or maybe it's like I don't even know. It was something where like Gragas' job like it was just stay neutral, like gather CS, don't die solo or whatever. Just sit there and like we have winning top and winning the bot lane, so like just let our sides win. And the whole time he's just like spam like calling for our jungler to sit there. So our jungler is just like sitting in a bush for 30 seconds at a time, and like go and clear a camp. And like our mid laner would be like, "Dude, no, like you have to gank him. He has no flash. Like you need to come mid now." Then he'd come back mid, and like he'd be on a ward this whole fucking time. And he would just sit there and waste so much time, and like his tempo would be so screwed up because he didn't want to tell him no. And so I eventually like for removing a lot of customers out of the equation, but I basically was like, dude, you need to tell him to get off and like, do his own thing.
You can cuss, by the way. We're past 10 minutes.
Tell him to fuck off and like do your own game and do what we say that we want to do from the beginning of the game. If it's getting bot ahead, path towards bot lane. Don't path upward and try to like sit mid for 2 minutes doing fuck all. Like, and it helped too because we eventually had a Inax who's on Vitality as like their B team AD carry. And he helped reinforce a lot of the ideas that I was teaching the guys, and we kind of started picking up at the end. But we just didn't really get to show it, which is really unfortunate too. Because I think if you ask any of the guys, like a week, like the days leading into before I went to the hospital and before our match and stuff like that, we were all like, dude, we're like, it doesn't matter who we play against. Like, as long as it's not Winthrop or Maryville, like we're chilling. And then, it just didn't work out, I guess.
Well, I do want to see you guys run it back, and with that roster, because like looking at your games and looking at your run through your conference, like for my prep, I was like, damn, this team's like they're pretty fucking good. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, and so none of that anti-synergy really showed on the stage games and the matches. So you definitely did a good job fixing it. I was just like kind of perplexed, like this, Uncle Sam, like you said, new challenger. Like I was just like, who is this guy? Like he's not anywhere in.
He is an interesting. I will also say that him and I just have like the most opposite personality types. Like I'm very much like laid back, go with the flow. I'm not super. It's not that I'm not passionate, but I'm very like controlled about like what I say and how I say it. And he's just like loud as hell, says the most outlandish things. Like, said like he'll just start fucking screaming, and I'm like, Martin, shut up. And then he'll start screaming, and I'm like, Marty, shut up. And then like he'll scream again, and I'm like, I'm going to just put you on Annie every single game if you don't shut up. And like,
not the Annie, dude.
It's like one trick at this point. But yeah, I mean, he's an interesting fella, and I enjoyed working with him. So I drive me nuts, but yeah, he's great to work with, and he's an interesting personality for sure.
I do hope to see more of you guys in CLOL and more of Uncle Sam, hopefully. I want to shift over and talk about NACL because obviously you competed in it. It feels like the Challenger series or the tier 2 scene, let's say the tier 2 scene of League of Legends has gone through quite a number of iterations, bracket wise, formats. I don't even know, like challengers, a cat, like there's so many different words for it now. In regards to the NACL qualifier, right? Your team was in a very unique position where they went 4-1 in the round robin, one of the higher placing teams within the round robin. And in both of them, unfortunately, you did get eliminated by two very strong teams in Team Fish Taco and Maryville University, respectively, in each of the splits, the NACL qualifier splits. What's your take on the NACL qualifier format bracket? Is it better? Is it worse? Do you feel like a lot of the 4-1 teams kind of got a short end of the stick? Obviously, you're going to speak from Native's perspective, and that's completely fine. But like, how do you actually feel about this?
I mean, I honestly, like, I don't hate the format too much. I had some issues with it. Like, for example, the second tournament, if we got first seed out of our group, we had a harder bracket than if we got second seed. So we were like super heavily incentivized to just throw away a game. And so our game was literally streamed, and I was like, "Hey, TOs, you do realize that like, if I'm acting in my team's best interest, the org's best interest right now, I'm telling my players to run it down, and they're running like Ghost Cleanse, right? Like,
which we didn't.
I have some morality a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. I think the issue with tier 2 is that it's very responsive to tier 1 and what the orgs want, and I don't know how Riot can build a system that does what they want, and that's tier 2. We're talking like tier 3 if we're talking about the qualifiers, right? I don't know if there's a way that they can build a system that is what the teams want and is also what the people that are currently participating want. I think it's a really hard kind of intermediary to go to. I don't what's it called? I'm not jealous of Whipley's position, who's like the main guy from Riot on that end, who's in charge of Champs Q and the NACL and stuff like that. I do not envy his position at all because I think it's really hard. But yeah, I mean this whole system as a whole right now, it just I think their goal is to get outside teams like the Sentinels and the Natives and the XSETs and those kind of teams to invest in it. And unfortunately, just right now, like it just doesn't make sense. I think that it is more likely than not that NACL just doesn't exist in a year and a half, as we know it now. I think that eventually given the incoming recession, teams are going to be like, dude, we don't want to be spending hundreds of $1,000s a year on academy players that we don't really want anyway.
Well, that's public knowledge, right? That was released that a lot of the teams voted against fielding or these kinds of, like you said, tier 2, tier 3 organizations or teams.
Yeah, and I think as the economy kind of gets worse in esports, especially League of Legends, because Valorant is like on the upswing, Apex is on an upswing, but like League in North America is maybe not dying, but it's trending that way right now, especially with the overall economy and stuff like that. I think that at a certain point, teams are going to just be like, if you want us to continue investing, like we're only doing it for LCS, and Riot's going to be like, okay. And I think when that happens and that requirement to feel an academy team is doomed, then NACL is going to go in through another shift. And so that's kind of the big question from like an org's perspective, and coming from a situation where like my goal is to either make native money, or if we're going to lose money, do it in a way that where we get some form of return, whether it's fans, whether it's exposure, whether it's whatever, right? And just right now with the current format, and even if they change the NACL queues and stuff like that, it just doesn't exist. Like it's kind of hard to say that after one split, but it just doesn't exist right now. So there's not a real reason. And you and I were talking beforehand about, how salaries basically from last split, you could build a roster at X amount, and you can build a similar caliber roster for like 10% of that this split. And it's still not worth it for a lot of the teams that are going to be participating. So I don't know if there's a solution. I think the issue is with League of Legends in North America as a whole. But yeah, I don't think that there's a really easy solution for Riot to implement. And unfortunately, given the current state of things, they can't really guarantee that the current format is. They can't say we're going to give it 5 years because it's esports and things change every minute. So,
barring the economic circumstances right now, it does feel like tier 2 and tier 3 scene of North American League of Legends has always been kind of just up in the air. It's kind of just been like an afterthought. The direct comparison that we usually see it getting drawn to is EU Masters, right? It's like that's their tier 2 scene essentially. What do you think? This is going to be like probably a long question, most likely a long answer.
You're setting yourself up for it, man.
Yeah. What do you think, or where do you think NA went wrong in regards to developing the NA pipeline, and in regards to how has EU necessarily been able to do it, where they've been constantly pumping out high quality players for a pretty long period of time, right? Where do you think NA messed up, right? Or like maybe not a specific point in time where it's like, oh yeah. Yes, 2018 spring, that's where we fucking shit the bed. No, it's like, well, what were we doing that we thought would work, didn't, and why are we at where we're at today?
Yeah. So just getting rid of some of like the basic ones, like North America has less player base, ping is worse.
Yeah.
Right?
The standard, right? Ping, salad, like all the crazy stuff. Not enough players, blah 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 blah. Not enough orgs invested. Which
to be fair, I don't even consider those real reasons why I think North America has kind of failed. I think the main ones are that we didn't do anything to really incentivize people or like advertise for new people to come in. Like North America League grew super hard because again you had great personalities and stuff like that. And then we never thought about how to make that kind of growth sustainable, or like how to make it happen long term. I think it grew way too fast. I think it hyperinflated itself to the point of like the fact that a few years ago Sword Art was making multiple millions of dollars, and now like basically everyone and their mother is being shopped around. Like even like the LCS veterans are basically being shopped around for minimums. I think it goes to show that like we just kind of we let crypto money and VC funding and stuff like that kind of inflate the space too much, and then the bubble popped, and now we are here where we are, where we're in a recession, and a bunch of things are stacked against NA as a whole, and other regions too. But other regions are their situation's different. But I think at the end of the day, Riot didn't really know what they were doing with League here. I think that stretch from like season 5 to like season 9 was like a really dark age in terms of like, guys, the party's gonna go on forever, and then like we don't have to do anything. And then by the time that you had like Jackie Felling come in and try to change some stuff up and kind of really try to figure out, oh shit, like we have a problem here, how do we fix it? Now it's getting to the point where maybe it's too late. I forget who it was in the space, but someone that works in the space full time, they mentioned something along the lines of like League as a whole is going to be like the first child, where Riot learns from what they did wrong here and then fixes it for Valorant. I think Valorant has a really bright future. I think in terms of esports in America, it's going to be like the biggest one because America loves shooters. There's jokes there. I'm not going to make them. But we have the recoil there is pretty good. But like we love our FPS. Like like I said, I started with Call of Duty. Like all of my friends started with like playing Call of Duty and stuff like that. So Valorant as a whole is going to be really really popular in America. And what we've actually seen is that over in Asia or whatever, it's still popular there. It's not going to be like the most popular game ever unless like League dies out, which it won't over there for like quite a long time, I think. but Riot is going to be able to learn like the mistakes and what worked for League, and then transition it over to Valorant and whatever they continue to do stuff, and maybe their FGC too. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, I think we just we let the native growth just happen, and we're like, this is going to happen forever, and we don't need to do anything. And then by the time we realize we need to do something, like, you know, the house is on fire, it's like, oh, the sprinklers will set it out, and then at a certain point, the sprinklers stop working, and the house is still on fire. We're like, oh, my entire bedroom's on fire, and so is the entire first floor, and I don't know what to do. And now it's a bit too late.
There seems to be a sentiment where, obviously, like you said, what you're saying is very popular, and I think it's personally, I think it's correct. But there also seems to be a sentiment where League has a very unique opportunity to, I'm not going to say, you know, rise again like a phoenix, but we are going back to a very, like you said, lower salaries, lower this, lower that. Do you think there is a unique opportunity for League to kind of rebuild itself in a way that it should have been built from the very beginning, to like the bubbles popping, this and that, League minimum salaries? It's like you said, 90% cheaper to field amateur teams. Do you think there's an opportunity there for League of Legends and Riot to kind of redo it in a way where it now has to focus not on, like you said, the natural growth, but we've got to start essentially maybe not square one, but a little bit farther back and go, hey, let's do it right this time. Let's make sure we're not overpaying players. Let's make sure that we are fostering North American talent, right? Because the play versus stuff does not have a monopoly over high school anymore. Collegiate programs seem to be getting, a bit more recognition, right? It seems like it's becoming more valid. Obviously, Maryville qualifying, that kind of stuff, right? Do you think there's some sort of opportunity there where like Riot can maybe not fix the mistakes they've made, but, you know, redo it in a different way?
I think that there's a world where League can go back to what it used to be in terms of like, I think at some point maybe franchising just goes away in terms of like teams being like, I want out of this financial commitment. And then at that point it'll be, you know, lower budget, you know, basically glorified amateur and stuff like that. And that'll be how the team works and or the league works, and there'll be relegations and stuff like that. And I think that's probably what's going to end up happening. Like if I had to put a bet on it, I think at a certain point, like that's what will end up happening. I don't think we're ever going to get back to the point of LCS players making multiple millions of dollars on a contract. I don't think we're going to get a 2-year, $4.6 million deal for a player, right? Because again, and this is kind of like the catch-22 where like these orgs, they need to make money now. Like it's just like, you know, business theory 101 where a lot of orgs just want whatever's like the best immediate return. So if they feel like cutting academy and cutting that growth opportunity for players is what's best for their bottom dollar and will keep them alive longer, then they're going to do that. If they think that removing the import rule so that way they can get better caliber players from China, Korea, PCS, stuff like that, if they think that that's better for their bottom line, they can, you know, maybe make a Miracle Worlds run or whatever, and that'll be how they save money and make a profit, then that's what they're going to do. The issue is that at a certain point, that's going to turn off a ton of players and a ton of fans in a region where we've never really cared about being super competitive in the first place. Like it was cool when C9 was amazing back in season 3, season 4, but the reason that everyone liked them was like sneaky media as being funny as hell. It was like we are a content based region. We're not a competitive based region, right? And so unfortunately, I think what's going to end up happening is that it's just not sustainable, and we're going to have to we're going to try to I think Riot's probably going to make a lot of changes to just keep the lights on for a lot of these teams. You know, I don't think there's a lot of teams that if they could get their money back for investment, they would, and then they would just go off and invest it somewhere else. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to go back to where League was, but I hope Valorant and other esports in the future can kind of learn what League did wrong, and then they can be the one who it's like, this is the first esport that lasts per se, like long term.
The first sustainable model, quote
Yeah,
unquote.
the one
You gotta
that
love
lasts
that word.
like maybe decades or something like that, right?
Potentially.
I guess Counter Strike is technically at that point almost. I would say, like all things considered, they're not super popular everywhere, and like it's dead in North America. But you know, like that StarCraft, like I think League is going to die out at a certain point, especially in North America, kind of how StarCraft did at a certain point. But yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll have something to show for that. Hopefully the lessons that that Riot learned and that other people can learn from Riot will manifest itself in something else in a different game.
What is stopping, you know, Brandon Collamer from pursuing head coaching or GMing or a role at a tier 1 organization for you? Like what is it? You could obviously say like maybe some of the obvious answers. I don't know people. I don't know who to talk to. Give me a number, give me a name. But realistically, I feel like, you know, obviously you're really starting to get your groove in amateur. You're really starting to hit your stride in CLOL. Like a lot of the years that you've put in. What is stopping you, I guess, internally? Because you obviously hold like a full-time job on the side. Like esports is your side piece, right? That's what it is. It's a way to put it.
Esports pays my bills, and my regular job pays for investing and everything else and all my fun money. The brutal honest answer is that I don't want to. I think for a long time I wanted to. I connected with what I saw in esports, and I saw something I was passionate about. I don't think this is like a very philosophical question, but for full context, this time last year, this time last year, I was interviewing for full-time positions in LA and stuff like that, for, you know, general manager, coach type positions, stuff like that. I originally took Far's course that he offered, his Saito course, because I thought in some world I would want to do esports full time. And I think what I've realized is that if you want to work in esports full time, I think there's actually a quote from Papa Smithy that I saw from one time. So that if you want to work in esports full time, you're either really crazy or you're really stupid. Because you either you are basically just doing it out of passion, and it's the passion drives you, and you don't care about like looking at things objectively, or you're just not aware of the situation that you're getting yourself into, and that's fine for people, right? Like it's totally it's totally okay to just be like, I am fine making 45, 50K and a ton of job instability or whatever to pursue esports because it's just my passion. But what I think I've learned is that for me, I want to get a lot of value and a lot of purpose out of like what I do. And I can do that in ways other than esports. And I can still do stuff in esports, right? Like I can still coach teams. I can still be involved at the tier 2 level. I can still help kids. Like I a lot of my purpose is like I can get kids scholarships. Like one of my biggest flexes that I've ever had in terms of like everything that I've done in esports, whether it was winning tournaments, like, you know, upsets, going to LA, working with Riot on the broadcast, whatever. My biggest flex that I always got was the fact that Shogo messaged me 3 years ago, like, hey, I'm a dude from Israel. I want to play in North America. And I helped recruit him to USD, and now he's living here and he wants to be in America for the rest of his life. Like that's the biggest flex that I have. And so I can still get value in esports without setting myself up to be really unhappy when this bubble finishes popping in a little bit. Because I think right now, like for all the people that are doing esports full time, like I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you land on your feet. I think even those people know that at a certain point, like that we're going to be in a really, really bad spot, especially League, but we're going to be in a pretty bad spot. And that's just, you know, I got a good life, and, you know, I'm pretty successful in what I do, and I don't need to open myself up to screwing myself over when I'm happy with what I got. So
it's funny.
I thought about this. I've thought about this so much. Trust me.
It's not that. It's that like you're an individual that has been flirting with esports, has been seeing it on the weekends, right? Taking it out on the day, but you don't want to take her to your parents' house. You don't want to take them to visit your parents or anything like that.
That's that's a very privileged thing.
Why immerse yourself in esports? Why do this? You mentioned obviously you got somebody a scholarship, it's fulfilling, but why are you toiling away at esports? Because sometimes, from my knowledge, it can be almost like a full-time job, right? With the amount of effort you're putting in as both a GM and a coach, I doubt your weeks are very free. I doubt,
I can show you my Google Calendar. It's like there's a solid like
I don't need to see it.
Yeah, it was like hour break for like free time, and then like hour break for time that I was spending with my girlfriend, and like that's the only 2 hour break I had in a full day on the weekdays. I mean, I enjoy competing, and it's kind of how I get my sense of competing. I get it through coaching and stuff like that. It's something I'm good at. It's a second and a third and a fourth form of income for me, which is always really nice. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of different things, but yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it depends on the situation that you find yourself in. I'm lucky enough to be afforded with like really good opportunity in life. Like I was an engineer at Facebook, and that's opened a lot of opportunities for me in terms of, you know, being able to do things that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do and whatnot. Both financially and like just as a person getting to work on cool projects. And um, yeah, I just think that what esports has to offer me right now just isn't that, and I don't think it'll be that. But I can still, it, I try not to make like a worse like version of your analogy, but it's
Take
like
your
the
best
buddy that
shot.
you used to be. No, it's like the buddy that you used to be really, really good friends in high school, right? Like you can still like hang out with him occasionally after you graduate and stuff like that, but it doesn't mean that you need to force yourself to continue to be best friends with that person, right? And this is something I actually learned a lot recently. Like you're allowed to care about something and still let it go. You are able to sit there and say, I want to do this and I would love to do this. And this is where my heart is telling me, but also I need to be able to look out for myself and set those boundaries and be like, this isn't good for me, so I shouldn't do it. Which is something I really was bad at like my entire life. And it's just over the last like couple months of like trying to like grow as a person and do new things and go through like personal struggles and stuff like that is something that I think I've learned a lot about, and I think it reflects my opinions in esports. Like I would love to, but in my heart of hearts, I also know that's not good for me, so I shouldn't.
You're saying esports is like a strip club, right? It's fun when you go, but you don't want
Is
to be
that
there
is
all the
that where
time.
you go with these analogies in this thing? Oh man,
Right? It's fun when you go.
I wouldn't know. I've never been to a strip club, so I'll take your word for it.
I've been once. It was not the most pleasant of experiences. I was just gonna say that.
Not surprised.
um, I want to hear, like, obviously, like you said, you've been, I wouldn't say doomer negative, but you have been very cautious of people entering esports. Obviously, your path, and I feel like everybody's path in esports is always so unique and different. Advice to somebody, two different people, somebody coming out of high school and somebody coming out with a degree of from college. Advice for those two people that want to work in esports somehow, some way, right? Whether it's esports adjacent, whether it's, doing what you do or doing what you've seen other people do. What would you say? Here's what you need to do to work in esports. Here's what you should be doing. Here's how to do it, based off of what you've seen. So let's first start with the high school guy, and then let's move on to the college graduate.
I think the high school guy, try a lot of different things. Like for me, I tried coaching, I tried being a caster, I tried working at like the biz dev level. I've tried a lot of different things. So just try a bunch of stuff and see what you want to do while you're, going to school or while you're working, like outside of high school, right? And then when you have a degree, think on is like at the end of the day, it just comes down to opportunity cost, right? Like, and this kind of goes for both people, right? Like, what are you giving up in order to pursue esports, right? Like, for in as a comparison, like the average like academy player, because I was talking about this earlier today, if you are in academy right now with again your situation may be very, very rocky, like you may not have a job potentially, and you like look at copy, like we can talk about copy, right? So copy
Yeah,
has been
yeah.
in academy for like quite a bit, right? And now he's retiring. What is the opportunity cost of copy continuously being doing what he's doing, right? Like if he's able to get another career that's more stable, more along the lines of he gets more fulfillment out of it, less stress about like getting laid off randomly, you have more control over your own career and your own growth. Like that's really rewarding for a lot of people. So just think about like what you're getting, what your opportunity cost is. Because again, I say in the same breath that like you shouldn't pursue esports. If esports is the only thing that makes you happy, and like you're not like you would rather be like working at Wendy's, not able to pay rent, rather than give up the opportunity to be like an entry level team manager or something like that, then like by all means do what makes you happy. Because at the end of the day, like I always tell people, like your happiness, like you're the only person that's going to care about your happiness. Prioritize that first. Everything else can come second to you prioritizing your own happiness. Um, but just understand what you're giving up potentially, and it goes for both people, right? Like when you're out of high school, if you want to moonlight during esports, there's probably not a lot of like crazy opportunities for you anyway. Like when I got out of high school and I couldn't do anything, so I was like, screw it, I'll pick up coaching or whatever, right? And even in college, right? Like I did a lot of like the time I invested in esports originally was because I was working as a janitor at a Buffalo Wild Wings for 20 hours a week, making minimum wage. Like that was like 4 years ago, by the way.
Yeah.
And so I had all the time in the world, so I was like, I might as well just keep doing esports stuff and see what happens and make a little bit of cash. Um, but at a certain point, right? Like if you want to work in esports, you're going to be giving up a lot. You're going to be giving up financial freedom. You're likely going to be forcing yourself to stay in a really high cost of living area. You are not going to have a lot of control over your own future and destiny. You are working in an industry that is usually led by people that are very incompetent or very snake oily. I think a lot of the top people in esports either don't know what they're doing or they're just bad people, but they're ruthless, so they can kind of maintain that spot. So just understand that. And if that's what you want to do, then that's what you should do, right? If that's what's going to make you happy and gives you fulfillment, then do it. But be aware of what you're doing, right? It's like signing up for college. Like same thing goes for college. If you want to go to college or not, understand that if you sign up for college, you're signing up for tens of thousands of dollars in student debt potentially. So just be informed for whatever you decide to do.
Sound advice.
I'm a wise old man at age 25.
He would be pissed if I didn't mention him and didn't talk about him. You've had some amazing staff on a lot of your teams. Can you talk to me about Quanta?
Quanta. I love Mike. Quanta,
Hello.
if Quanta is a perfect example of that dude should just not be doing esports because that dude is so talented and so skilled that he should be doing anything else with the skill set he has. That guy is unironically, and all the people that I've ever worked with in esports that like most talented at their craft, it's him. Like, and I don't even think it's close. There's no coach that coaches better. There's no content creator that does better content. Like he is just the best data guy I've ever worked with, and I work with people that make 100, 150, $200,000 a year that are less skilled at what he does. That guy is insane.
Perfect. Well, hopefully he can throw this in there for his pitch because
That's my referral.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy because it doesn't feel like it's just Quanta, right? It feels like there are a lot of like very talented people out there that can do so much that are just like for XYZ reason are not getting picked up. Do you?
It's just the industry.
Yeah, like what would you attribute that to? Is it just like
it's just industry?
The famous word is nepotism, right? That's what gets.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, I cannot say, but yeah, I think that there's definitely things as nepotism meaning your way up the ladder. There is, making friendships, relationships, or whatever just to social climb. I think that's a thing, and I think that at a certain point in esports, you don't always have full autonomy of your career. The only thing that you can control is how long you're willing to put into it. But yeah, there's a lot of talented people. Like Quanta is very talented as a data analyst, and again, like at a certain point, like just because how the industry is, there's only so many spots and everyone wants to do it. So at a certain point, like that and that's how I was, right? Like I wanted to do esports for like a really, really long time, full time. Like I even up until like last year. And then I realized like why am I willing to like give up everything for this thing that like is not even in a position to want me back? Right? Like why am I trying to pursue esports so hard when esports is basically screaming at me, I don't want you in here. Go away, go do something more productive, right? I think a lot of people are passionate. They have fond memories of esports. Like for example, literally watching the whole Danny Penta in Houston live, that gave me enough energy to like pursue esports full time for like a year and a half. And at a certain point, you're just like, never mind. This stuff is slim to none. So, but it all depends on what you get fulfillment out of. So if you don't really care about wages or job security and it's just esports makes you happy, then we'll send.
Well, I do appreciate you being so generous with your time. I know your schedule's packed. It's got bars everywhere.
No, now it is boring. Now it's just gym, sleep, go to the movies, spend time with my mom. That's about it.
Do you have anybody you'd like to shout out specifically, right? It could be anybody. It doesn't have to be like specific to esports, but you know, kind of who out there do you want people to know? Like, yeah, this is who it is, right? Like, who do you want to shout out?
I don't think I really have anyone in particular. I would say that like as like a general thing, like I obviously went through like some pretty serious like stuff recently. Like I got diagnosed with PTSD when I was in the hospital and stuff like that. And the amount of like support and stuff like that that I got after that whole situation was wonderful. Um so I got literally like hundreds of messages. I got flowers, I got gifts, like I got so much like support from people. And so if you're a person that reached out to me or like supported me, or even checked with my roommate to see how I was doing, or if she sent something, like I'm very appreciative of you. And I'm very, very thankful for all those people for checking in and taking care of me, and making sure that I was okay when I got back. So that's about it. I that's basically it.
Well, once again, thank you so much. All of his stuff will be obviously in the description box below, the Twitter, the Liquipedia page, Ole Miss's team page and native and everything like that. So we'll link that all down below. Collamer, thank you so much, man. It has been a pleasure. We went over time, but it didn't feel like it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much.